Hello, friends. Thank you so much for joining us for another episode brought to you by Share the Well. I talked to my good friend Biju Mathew, who's been in the media business for over 2.5 decades. So I have some very interesting conversations coming up. Some of his experiences, some of the things that he has seen, some of the things that he has experienced. So we're going to bring this in a two-week series where the first week is going to focus on Biju's personal journey in this business. We talk of various aspects of the business. I mean, I had very little time to quiz him around this. Maybe we'll bring him back for another episode sometime later. But it's an intriguing business that he is part of, and I get to hear his story and take a listen. It's going to be interesting. If you've not really been in the media business, it'd be an eye-opening story for you to kind of listen into. And I'll talk to you guys at the end of this episode. So thank you, Biju, for, I want to thank you officially for coming on. And as I told you that I generally ask folks to just introduce themselves a little bit so I don't have to do the hard work on introducing people, prior to the show. But, feel free to, introduce yourself a little bit so, they, at least the ones who are going to listen at least understand who you are and what you do.
Sure. Don, thank you for having me on Share the Well. My name is Biju Mathew. I was actually born in India, born in Kerala, but I emigrated here to the States with my parents when I was a year old. Grew up and raised in northern New Jersey, where I still live with my family. We live literally right outside of New York City. I'm married. My wife is a pharmacist. I have two sons. My oldest son is a college freshman. My youngest son is in 7th grade. I've worked probably for about the last 25 plus years. I've been working in the media business, in network news. I was actually, I parted ways with my former employer a couple of years ago, was unemployed during the pandemic, but recently got a new job. So that's pretty much my story in a nutshell.
Yeah, that's great. And I know, the connection that Sunu, your wife, has and me is Bangalore and
That's correct.
Baldwin's.
Yes.
I was in
Yes,
Baldwin
exactly.
Boys. I know Sunu. Sunu actually studied in Baldwin Girls, right? Because
That's
her mom
correct.
was there. Right.
Exactly. And actually, my mother-in-law was principal during that time.
Oh,
So
wow.
imagine both my wife and my sister-in-law were
Oh my
students
God.
while their mother was principal.
That's tough. That's really tough. Yeah, because
Yeah.
I remember having a senior of mine whose dad was the physical education PE teacher.
Okay.
And what happened was, I still remember an episode where this guy was the vice captain of our school. So he became the
Okay.
vice captain of our school, and he made a mistake during some of our like annual sports event, and he got whipped by his dad in front of the whole school.
That's
It's
humiliating. That's that's something he probably still hasn't lived out after all these
I
years,
know, no. And yeah, I forget the name of the PE guy. I remember the name of my senior. His name is Anand.
Wow,
And
okay.
yeah, a very lovely dude, really, really class act. But he got whipped. We were shell shocked. We were seeing a dad whip his son right in front of the whole school.
Wow.
And he didn't utter a word, neither did he move. He got whipped and he went and kind of redid what he was doing. He was basically instructed to do something during the
Right.
sports event, march past or whatever, right? So it's crazy. So lovely memories in Baldwin's for me. I was a
Oh,
boarder.
absolutely.
Yeah, yeah. Good. So media, what kind of prompted you to join the media?
I was a journalism major in college. I went to New York University,
Ah,
and so it was something that interested in me. It interested me, and I did some internships and whatnot. And after college, I actually got a job with one of the networks. I actually worked as a PA runner for the Democratic Convention in 1992. That was when Bill Clinton was running. So I remember I was actually on the floor of Madison Square Garden when Bill Clinton accepted the nomination. So
Wow.
yeah, so that was really something. And then actually later that summer, actually went to work in Houston, where George Herbert Walker Bush accepted
Mm,
the Republican nomination. But I remember it was really fascinating, actually. Just seeing the whole setup and what was involved in these kinds of huge conventions. But yeah, no, I was on the floor in the garden the night that Bill Clinton accepted his nomination. So
mm,
that was really something to witness. Especially, I was only 22 at the time. So
mm.
to witness something historical like that was really something.
Right. And media is such a powerful mechanism in the world, right? I mean, I think it kind of creates a level of reality for kind of the general public.
It does. It does. I think, what media has really evolved, right? Whether it's network news, local news, newspapers, and obviously the internet has really changed much of that. But in my experience, at least in network news, is that audiences and the viewers are very sophisticated. They know what they like. They know what they like. They know what they don't like. And so, at least in my dealing, when working and going out in the field and meeting people, you have to people are very aware of what's going on.
Mm,
They if you work for a particular organization, they'll tell you, I'm not a big fan of that, or I don't like that reporter, I don't like this person. And I don't think much has changed. I think people have their biases, but I think working especially in network news from a young age, I was very naive to many things. I think,
mm,
growing up very sheltered. And then when you get thrown into such I guess it's almost like a Shark Tank. It's a very, very cutthroat environment. You don't see that. Sometimes you're a little naive and you're not self-aware, but as you excuse me, as you mature and grow in the industry, you realize the politics, the backstabbing. Not to say there aren't good people. I work with many, many good people, but it's a rough, rough environment. In fact, many times I look back and said, you know what, if I could do it over again, I don't think I would have gone and worked in network news.
mm,
I
mm,
think I would have probably chosen a different path altogether because you really have to have a thick skin. It's
mm,
not a business for the faint of heart because people, I
mm,
think, on the surface think, oh, it's glamorous and you go to all these places. No, it's really hard work behind the scenes, and it can be very, very difficult. It's not a not typical 9 to 5. Yeah, there's some days you might only work 8 or 10 hours, but then there are those days could be 12, 15, 16 hours. I remember, traveling, before having kids and getting married, traveling all over the country, which was great. When you're young, it's exciting, jumping on a plane,
mm,
going here, there, everywhere. It's great. But as you get older, you realize that's a young man's game. That's a young, but some people still thrive on that. There are folks that I've worked with who are well into their 40s and 50s who loved the thrill. They loved it. And I mean, that's good. And I think, for some people they love the adrenaline rush, right? But then for some of us, your priorities change as you get older because it can
mm.
really, really take a lot out of you.
Right, right. And so so there's the infrastructure, right? And obviously we have few players who are in this big time, right?
Right.
So there's infrastructure, there's a lot of money that's going to get pumped in, right?
Yes.
And obviously any business will have to worry about their top line, bottom line,
Yes.
and most of it comes from viewership, advertisement. Yeah, I'm just guessing here, right? More than the content. The content is a mechanism to get to the viewer, who then the base is then I don't know the operating model, but I'm just guessing.
Right.
The
No, no,
content is the mechanism, right, to get to the people who then become the
yes.
base to which you sell, and then you make your top line, right?
Exactly. And I think, you know what, years ago, right, there were very limited media outlets, right? you had ABC, CBS, NBC. Then
Mm,
came along, CNN, and a few other players, Fox. But now you can consume media in so many different forms,
yeah.
but you're right though, and the landscape has become so fragmented where there is a niche for every kind. You want liberal news, you want conservative news, you want faith-based news, you want political news, you want business news, you name it, it's available. But you're right
Mm,
though. I think when a lot of these news divisions were created, news was a public service. But
right.
that idea has gone out the window a long time ago. News is a money-making business.
Mm. And so, you know, so is news, let me rephrase. My thought is, so how much of reporting what is happening is is really the focus?
I think it really depends on the organization. I think it depends on where you work. Like, for example, if you look at PBS and what they do, I think they really are journalists who report on the facts, the news, what's going on out there. I think network news, whether it's ABC, CBS, NBC, they report the news, but there's also entertainment, there's infotainment. I think, for the American viewer, I think people love their news. They want their politics. They love their celebrity news, right? I think you get a mix of all of that. But I think if you want serious, hardcore news, you've got to look beyond the networks. You've got to look at more specialty outlets. You got to look at PBS. I think places like CBS, like 60 Minutes, it's a venerable news magazine. They do a very nice job. They've been, what, 40, 50 years they've been on the air. Uh, I think the public affair program and Sunday news shows, the political shows do a good job. Meet the Press, Face the Nation. I mean, it just depends on what you want, right? I think
Mm,
what's your appetite, right? What is it that you're into in terms of news? And you can find it and you can customize it accordingly. See, I think, 20, 25 years ago, you couldn't do so, but now, I mean, it's what do
yeah,
you want? And you could customize your news feeds.
exactly. I mean, I have, the if you have a Apple phone or whatever, Google, Android, you can customize the content that's coming in. You can choose
Exactly.
basically what you want, right? And feed that. So, every channel obviously has some sort of values behind it, right?
Right.
And maybe even leadership and agenda behind it. And these days, we've seen kind of the extremities, right? Left and right, extreme left, extreme right, whatever you want to call it, and everything in between.
Right.
And because of the internet, it's so everybody has a voice. It seems that you can just write up a blog or have
Right.
a radio channel or some kind of, just like what we are having right now is like having a
Which
podcast.
which I don't think is a bad thing. I think it's good. I think the one thing is that viewers or listeners or however you consume information, people love to share their opinion. And
Mm,
frankly, I think it's fascinating, right? When you do hear different points of view. Look, I think as viewers, as consumers of news, we have to be smart enough to know what's garbage and what has value, right? And so
mm,
I think there's nothing wrong with that because I think, whether it's on YouTube and you see all these opinions, or whether you watch Fox or NBC or MS, whatever it is, but I think there's a value to it. There, there,
right.
real, there's a real value because I can even find myself sometimes flipping between the different news channels just to see the take people have on the same topic. And it's
Mm,
sometimes it's comical, sometimes like,
mm.
oh, I didn't think of that. That's an interesting point of view.
Right. So synthesis is challenging, right? I mean, I don't know if everybody or maybe an average consumer of this information is able to synthesize like maybe you do. And, sometimes I do because I read all of these other news and I want to
Right,
figure out where the truth lies. Sometimes
right.
you get all these angles. So I don't know if people are, have that energy and that, drive to do that. I don't know what's your
Yeah,
experience.
yeah. I think that's a valid point. I think sometimes it's information overload, and
Mm,
I think we get lazy, right? Like for example, if I only want to see things from the right or conservative, to me, Fox is the gospel truth. Or if it's the extreme left, it could be MSNBC. But if I want something in the middle, maybe I'll look at PBS NewsHour, or I'll look at the Wall Street Journal, it just depends. But I think sometimes people do get lazy. They get into kind of like a routine, and like that that's their source of information. But I really do think for the average person, I really do think you need to look at different news outlets, because I
Mm,
think you have to get a 360 on the news. You can't just look at the news with like blinders on, and this is it. This is the only place. I think you really do have to. I think it never hurts to read opinion columns, like you'll see in the Wall Street Journal or the New York Times or the Atlantic or wherever they might be. Because I think some of these guys have really valid points. I think you
yeah.
really can learn something. I think
Mm,
also it's good to consume foreign news, whether it's the BBC or whether it's other English language channels like maybe Al Jazeera in English or in Eastern, whatever the case might be. But I think
yeah.
it doesn't hurt to. It's funny, us, being of Indian origin. I find that Indian news channels really kind of, you know, act like they're Western news channels. You've got like the 10 pundits on the screen and
Right.
people are yelling at each other. It's like, it's crazy. It's like, it's amazing how they model their news networks after Western news networks.
Right. Right. True, true. And it's mayhem actually in India.
It really
Yeah.
is. It's
Yeah. I kind of personally I do reading so I can cut out the noise, and
right.
I listen to podcasts which then it engages me rather than get all the interpretation
Right.
of the intent of the news. It's really not reporting, but it's really, and you are expounding about what you're hearing
Correct.
and making you formulate an opinion. It's almost an opinion. It's really not, kind of reporting,
Right. True. True.
right?
No, it's look, I think there are reporters. I think a lot of journalists out there do their best to remain neutral, to be unbiased. But I think again, it's the bias exists on both sides, right? The viewer has it,
Right.
the reader has it. Like, for example, if there's a particular journalist, whether they're print or broadcast, if you don't like them, they can be reporting the best thing. But if you have a distaste for that individual, you're going to think they're the devil. You're like, oh, they're
Hmm.
distorting the information. They're distorting, but that might not be the case. But it's you're seeing it through your bias, right?
Hmm.
Or how you view that person personally. So it,
Yeah.
it's it really varies from person to person. And I think there's a generational shift now, right? I think you look at college students, people in their 20s and 30s, they consume news much differently than we do, than our
Hmm.
parents did. So you definitely see that generational shift as well. For my own son, he gets a lot of his information. They love watching their late night hosts. People like Trevor Noah have a huge impact on this generation and how news is consumed.
Hmm. And so it's fascinating, right? So everybody is having a take on it, right? Some have comical takes, some have,
Right.
all the way to just reporting the news and everything in between. It's fascinating.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It is.
Eh,
It is. And I think again, I think someone like Trevor Noah, he deserves a space. Someone like Hassan Minaj, and when he did Patriot
yeah.
Act, that was a great show. That
Yeah.
because that's how 20 high school students and 20 somethings, that's how they got their information. And they love the way these guys present it.
Yeah. Yeah. And so the show hosts play a huge role.
Personality drives it. Per
Mm,
if you don't click with the viewer, people are going to just change because people have choices, people have options, right? There's no longer 3 channels or 5 channels. There's 300 channels. 400. I mean, it's like, not to mention the dozens and dozens of podcasts, the number of online. So I don't have to sit and watch any of the news networks you tell me. I can just go online and customize my news.
Mm.
I could find someone who's in line with my values, my value system,
Yeah, it's
which is good
fascinating.
and bad, which is could be dangerous
Exactly.
because if you align yourself with someone who's spewing misinformation, that could really take you down a dangerous road.
Right, right. But you know, I've seen that people just swear by either the channel or the person,
Of course.
you know, in the past. Yeah, yeah. So you worked a lot. So what were the divisions that you kind of worked in? In the overarching news.
So I spent, once I'd spent a few years at ABC, then I went to NBC. I spent quite a number of years at a program called Dateline. It was a news magazine show. They do a lot of murder mysteries now. Then eventually I moved over into the production management side of the business, logistics and all. So I have both editorial as well as production experience.
Right.
So it was good. It was good because I think it taught me a lot of project management skills. But I think working in news, in network news, the job is the job, whether regardless of whatever network you work for. What the challenge always is managing the egos. You're dealing with, you're dealing with people with strong egos, fragile egos. You're dealing sometimes with hot-tempered people. You're dealing with people who are laid back. So really, you never know who you're going to get when you answer the phone some days. You really don't.
Mm, mm. And so, can you explain a little more about the what the work actually, what you did?
So you know what? When you work on the editorial side, if you say work as an assistant producer, associate producer, your role is to assist the producer and editor in collecting various elements, whether it's research, pitching stories, doing phone interviews, looking for characters. So you're helping them gather the elements or the
Mm,
materials needed for that final story before it goes to air. And the thing in broadcast news, it's very collaborative. You've got the researchers, the production assistants, the associate producers, the producers. You have the correspondent, the camera crews, the graphic artists. You have, before a story can go to air, it has to be seen by legals and standards, video that you're using. Do we have the right to certain footage and pictures? So it's very, very collaborative because for most people, when they turn on TV, oh, hey, there's that 2 minute story, that 10 minute story, but they don't realize how many people it took to get that on the air. You've got the
wow.
editor. So there's so many, it's very collaborative, it's very team oriented. Everyone's got a specific role, and you've got to do that role. You've got to do that job.
Yeah, pretty much. And it's fast paced, I presume, right?
Yes, it is. It is. Some things, they turn around because, when people see breaking news, I mean, things are happening, they're reporting stuff as it's happening. Yes, sometimes you have a little bit of lead time, maybe a day, a few days, a week, maybe a few months for a project, but it really varies from project to project.
Right, because news can pretty quickly get stale, right? It's a
Yes.
product that doesn't sit on the stands, long, right?
No,
Because
it doesn't.
you're moving from story to story, or unless you have like a story that you really want to follow for a period of time, right?
They have a phrase in the business, there's a term called evergreens, like a tree,
Mm,
evergreen. They say, like sometimes people will produce evergreen stories. They don't have a specific air date. They'll put it on the shelf, it'll be done. They'll put it on the shelf. And when they see appropriate time, they'll run it. Maybe do a few little updates or whatever, but that's about it. And another fascinating thing that people don't realize is that also a lot of these news networks have obituaries that are usually ready to go, especially of famous people as they're getting older. They
oh
do
wow.
have like, yeah, yeah, for presidents, heads of state, noted celeb. They do. So that's why people are like, how did they get that story so quickly on whoever passed away? Well, they had that ready to go because
Oh
sometimes,
wow.
yeah, yeah, they'll do that. Or they'll have elements or sections of certain things ready to go when they have word that like such and such is on their deathbed or someone is very gravely ill. They'll start making those preparations.
Wow. Who knew?
Who
Right?
knew? No, no, it's true. That's something like, they do that with all the presidents. especially like with, like someone like a Jimmy Carter, who they thought many times, but you know what? The man is still, but I
God
guarantee
bless his
you
heart.
that every news network has a Jimmy Carter obituary ready to go. The
You could
minute
talk
they
to
get,
yeah, the what was that Queen Elizabeth's husband, right?
exactly, I can guarantee that the BBC, ITV, all those British networks have a
Mm,
Prince Philip obituary ready to go. They probably have a Queen
mm.
obituary ready to go. You know,
Wow, wow,
so it's like
wow.
anything like that. They have these things in the wings.
Hmm. So if you recollect, what happened in these years, 25, 26 years, what's the most, without details, but if you want to share details, great. But what's the most interesting story that you worked on? I was like, wow.
Oh, that's, I got to tell you, hands down, over about 20, it's 19, yeah, it was 1997. Went to the Canadian Arctic. We did a story on polar bears.
Oh,
Went to
wow,
Manitoba, Churchill, Manitoba, the polar bear capital of North America. It's
wow.
much different now, but I remember we were a team. We were like two camera crews, the correspondent, the producer, myself. We all slept. We slept at this research facility in Manitoba. It was fascinating, Don. I mean, just to be out there in the Canadian Arctic, you see, and it was also, there were a lot of tourists from all over the world, but to see these polar bears in their natural environment, it was fascinating. It really, really was
Mm,
something. It was like zero. It was really funny. I remember one night we were going back to the research center. I was driving this big van. All of a sudden, a silver fox just jumps out in front of the van and is like, right. And I don't want, because the roads are ice covered. If
oh
you
yeah,
go
yeah, yeah.
off the road, it's like you're going to hit a snow embankment. But this silver fox is just like running right in front of me. I'm trying not to hit it, at the same time not go off the road. It was, and I also remember they had a sign at the research facility. It says, look to your left, look to your right, and look up for polar bears, because sometimes they can even wind up on the roof.
Oh,
So they're like,
wow,
you have to be very aware once you step out of the facility. Polar bears could be walking around.
wow.
So
And you can't even see them. They're white, just like the
that
snow, right?
that's the thing. That's the thing. But at night, they could be lurking around. They could be looking for food or something like that. But yeah, but it was fascinating. It was truly,
Okay.
truly, that was the, and then, there have been a lot of like, court cases that I covered, but the polar bear thing was hands down probably the best. That was an amazing experience. An
That's
amazing
awesome.
experience.
Any story that you can remember that made you really sad?
Oh, it's what's interesting is when you see the American legal system up close, in
Mm,
covering like murder trials, people think, oh, it's this, that, but there are real people involved, right? It's to the outside world, it's salacious and it's juicy, but I got to tell you, when you're in a courtroom, and I've been in on a number of occasions, and the jury or the judge reads the guilty verdict, those deputies come up right behind the defendant and they put those handcuffs right on the defendant and they walk them right out. And you think, wow, it's eye opening, because you got to
mm,
think people made poor life decisions to wind up in that situation where now
mm,
they are in prison for the rest of their life. And it's really something to see. And also the fallout, the families, the victims, the families of the perpetrator, the families of it's, people don't realize it really has a wide ranging impact. And I think when you see these things up close, it affects you. It
mm,
really, really does affect. But at the same time, you have a job to do, right? You have a job to do, and you can't. I remember a number of years ago, I was covering something in Toledo, Ohio, and this particular guy, he was a bad dude, and his one of his ex-wives had just testified, and so I wanted to go speak to her. She looked at me and she grabbed me and gave me hugs like, "Where have you been? We've been wanting to. I was so shocked. I was so shocked that this woman reached out to me like that. But people have different reactions, because she was so relieved that what this guy had done, he's going to pay the price. Justice is going to be served, and she wanted to tell her story. Some people, it takes time. It's it's weird. It's weird because when people let you into their home when something like this happens, or just on anything, it's they're trusting you. They're trusting you to
Mm,
tell the truth, to tell their story accurately, right? And that's why sometimes you hear, oh, they didn't get that story right, or they. It's fascinating going into people's homes and talking. It's really eye opening. It's humbling as well, Don. It's really
mm,
when people let you into their homes because look, as human beings, right, we're going to be guarded. We don't want to share intimate details or something catastrophic that happened, share it with the world. But sometimes people are willing to do that on the basis that they hope that others don't have to go through that.
mm, mm, mm.
It's
The
it's
the
fascinating.
it's fascinating to kind of hear kind of the reaction of people. And
Yeah,
uh, so you mentioned truth, right? How much of that in your experience you see really people pursuing truth?
I think you know what you see it all the time. I think from the standpoint of a journalist or those of us who worked in the business is that truth is important because your credibility and truth are linked, right? If you're a liar, no one's going to trust you, no one's going to believe you. But if you tell the story accurately, people will believe you. I'll tell you a funny story. Again, this one was years ago. This was a weird story that happened in
Mm,
Maine. This was at a church, no less.
mm,
There was some
mm.
animosity in the church. Someone had poisoned the coffee.
Oh my God.
This is in
Oh,
small town Maine. This is in small
oh
town Maine.
wow.
Someone had, and one or two members died, and a whole bunch of
What?
them got hospitalized. Yes,
Oh my goodness.
it was a bizarre case. It was a bizarre. This happened at church. At church. So what happened was, I was sent up right to co-cover this.
Mm,
Is there a story there? And I remember I was in a room with I had a booker with me, another colleague was there. So all the people were in the room. Those who were hospitalized, they were there with their families. I told them who I was. I think there must have been maybe 2 dozen people in the room, and I told them who I was, who we're representing. We wanted to tell your story. We wanted to speak to the survivors. I said, don't identify yourself. But they asked me questions. They asked me, what are you planning to do? This, that, what's your. And a whole bunch of them, all the survivors agreed to talk to us. And so we
mm,
ended up doing a story with them and all that stuff. We brought in camera crews, our correspondent came up. But it was so bizarre because you're talking to a room full of people who you don't know. You don't know. You kind of know who the victims are because they're in their the hospital gowns, this, that. But the family members are really looking at you. They're like, look, they're looking right through you, right? Because my family member almost died. It was a very strange story in like small town America, right? And all this finger, it was a really, but it's
wow.
like it really gives you sort of a look into the human like psyche and condition.
Mm,
That was, I
mm,
gotta say, that was the part of working in TV, especially when I was on the editorial side of going out there and meeting people. It's people are fascinating. People,
mm,
and it doesn't matter the skin color. Just
mm,
people are fascinating because everyone's got a story. Everyone has a
mm.
story out there. I think in this current landscape, I think people still want to be heard, but it just depends on where you go, though. I think now it's
Mm,
a little more charged. At least when I was
mm,
out there, it was less charged. People were, but
mm.
who knows? I think there's still pockets and there's still a lot of places out there people want to talk. It's
Right,
all in how
right.
you approach them. And it's also, you have to seek the truth. Your truth
Mm,
and your credibility are linked.
It's
You can't have
it's
one without the other.
mm. I mean, you answered one of the questions I had. Have you worked on a weird story? So here it
Yeah.
is.
That's a weird. I know there are more. I know there are definitely more, but it's like they just don't come to mind. But yeah, it's
That's okay.
funny the people. I mean, I remember O.J. Simpson, his civil trial, chasing one of the jurors through a parking garage. I
Oh
remember like
wow.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's crazy. Oh, there was before OJ, about a year or two, there were, I don't know if you ever heard of the Menendez brothers. They were,
I've heard of them. Yeah.
yes, okay. So the Menendez brothers, they grew up in Beverly Hills. They would actually be our age. I think actually closer to my age, like 49,
Mm.
50. They were 16 and 17 at the time. Their parents were a horrific murder in Beverly Hills. Their father was a top Hollywood executive. It came to find out the father was abusing them, but they killed them. And even covering that trial, just it was so weird being in the courtroom and seeing the Menendez brothers and the guilty verdict and the jurors afterwards. It's just like you seeing this stuff. It's just like, because being there and watching it on TV are two different experiences.
Mm.
Two different
Mm.
experiences. So, and even
Yeah.
I remember years ago the Versace murder when uh we wound up in Miami Beach, and we were out there where Andrew Cunanan was. So again, like you see some of these weird tabloidy stories. It's weird. It's weird and
Yeah.
it's funny, but it's like it
It's
teaches
real.
you. It's
It's
real.
crazy, right?
You get to
Crazy.
look into the human condition. It's crazy. But things have evolved. Things have changed, but they haven't changed. People
Right.
still love their celebrity news. They still love it. Still love it.
No, when we talk about, the big theological concepts of depravity of man,
Right.
right? You've probably seen some stuff that, or kind of worked on some news that in some sense can vouch for
Yes.
what we claim to be ideology or theology, right? You probably seen that kind of play out in stories.
Definitely. 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 You see it play out in stories, and you also see it play out even in your places of work.
Mm,
It's a tough environment. And I
mm,
think, you have to have a thick skin if you want to work, whether you want to work in local news or national news, or you want to be a documentary filmmaker. Creating and bringing images to life, telling stories is a tough business,
wow.
you know,
Yeah, yeah.
on from every angle, from every
I,
angle.
I was saying that, kids channels seem like everything is kidsy, but there's serious people behind the
There's
kid shows.
there really is. They're everywhere, right? I think, and with networks, everything evolves, and you know, they know what their audience is like, right? They know what their audience is, because what an audience responds to on Friday evenings at 8 o'clock is different to what audiences respond to on Monday nights at 8 o'clock.
Mm,
The viewing tastes are not the same, right? Certain networks, their day parts or their evening or their prime time is stronger on certain days than it is on. So they know there's a science behind it. They know the numbers. They watch all that stuff. It's
there are agencies that do that kind of collection of information to provide
exact
back, right? There is a lot of
correct.
science, as you
I
said, right?
mean, exactly. You have Nielsen, but then also the networks themselves, all whether it's cable or broadcast, they also have people in house who study these numbers.
Mm,
Because
mm,
remember, the numbers also, that also you've got to involve sales and marketing, because that's how you've got to sell the particular ads, right? Whether when you watch ESPN, right? When you're watching sports, all you see everything is alcohol and trucks and car, because it's a male audience, right? But then when you're
mm,
watching, say, a Today Show or Good Morning America, a lot of the commercials are more female centered, pharma and exercise and healthy living. So they know what their audiences are.
mm, mm.
You don't see a commercial for a Ford F-150 in the morning hours, but you'll see that ad running constantly at night that has a male audience.
Right, right, right. Oh, there's a big data science aspect,
Absolutely.
right, around this.
Absolutely.
Thank you, friends, for joining us for that podcast brought to you by Share the Well. It truly is an honor for me to meet some of my friends like this, to talk about issues that matter to them, that matter to us overall, And our endeavor at Share the Well is to bring these content raw. We don't have any editing, by the way, in terms of the podcast that we bring, because we want to bring authenticity. We don't want to curtail and shape the story or the narrative, but to be truthful and to bring to you content that is relevant and content that will energize you, content that will motivate you. It's been a pleasure to do that. You can engage with us in many different ways. One of the ways would be to visit our website, which you should have in the notes section of the platform that you stream your podcast. It's for your benefit, I can repeat it here. It's called sharethewell.community. Or you can leave us a comment in the platform that you use to stream your podcast, and we can pick up those comments. If there's any topics that make sense to you and that you want discussed, we can always attempt to get those topics on. So I want to thank you again. Appreciate you guys listening in, and God bless you and have a wonderful weekend.